We are now discussing ethos in more detail. Ethos in an organizational context is referred to as organizational culture. The content of the ethos section includes why ethos is important in business. We also discuss ethos-related problems. We present the key concepts of ethos and tools for managing ethos. Why is ethos important in business? Ethos is a huge challenge in the global economy, an external challenge if the organization wants to diversify into different markets, because different markets have their own needs, demands, expectations, style, requirements, etc. And an organization has to adjust to its different customers in the different parts of the world and in the different markets in the world. If the organization diversifies its operations into different parts of the world, there is a huge challenge because different operating environments have different laws, have different cultures, habits, languages. Staff has different education, different expectations, etc. So managing the cultural diversity becomes a huge challenge to the organization. An internal ethos challenge is that the organization must adapt its own ethos to the changing environment. We have seen in the last 10 to 15 years how organizations changed their ethos from being an industrial age organization to being a more flexible, social network-based, information age-based organization. Those are fundamental challenges in the ethos of each organization. Also, it is necessary to integrate the diverse perspectives of staff. In many parts of the world, highly qualified knowledge workers become more and more global and operate in different environments. So at any one time, an organization has staff from different cultural backgrounds who have different expectations, different languages, different perspectives that need to be integrated. The organization also needs to integrate diverse functional perspectives. For example, the marketing function may be oriented towards customization, while its operations functions want standardization of production. So the two diverse functional perspectives could be a problem within the organization, and a lot of those problems are those of values and of perspectives. Also, other functions like the IT function or the HR function or legal function bring knowledge into the organization from their function-specific perspectives that represent a different culture that need to be integrated with the other functional perspectives within the larger organizational whole. So it is a huge challenge for an organization to manage itself as one coherent whole that has one core ethos around which the different parts of the organization can align. Ethos-related problems. One is lack of meaning. One doesn't know why one is doing what one is doing, and it has been observed, especially in the lower levels of an organizational hierarchy, that many workers are doing what they're told to do without reflection and without knowing. They, of course, cannot be creative and they cannot do things differently. They have to work routinely. Lack of clarity of ethos is a similar issue. Values are not agreed and reflected on, or assumptions and beliefs are not explored. What that means, again, is systems act by habit or routine. Conflicting ethos within a system can be very serious. There will always be apparent conflict. As we said earlier, the ethos has many sub-ethoses, like the operations ethos versus the marketing ethos. So the problem is not the diverse ethoses per se, but if one ethos is dominating the other ethoses and the conflict is not resolved appropriately. This is typically the case in organizations where, for example, a marketing ethos dominates the operations ethos. Many IT companies have the problem that they oversell and promise to customers all sorts of things, and then the operations cannot deliver. One can also have the opposite, that standardization and operational efficiencies are emphasized at the expense of customer orientation that the marketing ethos would want to drive. Then we are producing things that marketing can't sell. Conflicting ethos across levels in the systems hierarchy is another problem. For example, a team wants to innovate while management resists it, or vice versa. They want to bring new things into new thinking into the organization. Management doesn't allow it. I think that is a very universal conflict, also in many government organizations. Unconscious overruling conscious ethos is another problem. Saying one thing but doing another. Not living the values. As a management consultant, one often experiences that there's a whole lot of values on the wall and people do something different. So the unconscious habits are actually overruling a deliberate attempt to live different values. Ethos is not authentic. One point is that ethos is not aligned with the essence of the system. A typical example is the person who is studying, for example, medicine because father was a medical doctor and the family tradition is perpetuated, although maybe in essence the person would rather be an artist or an artisan. So the person doesn't live the essence. In an organization, sometimes organizations pursue production or products that are not aligned with what they are really good at. If they look at the history of the organization, they're trying to shift to a different mode of operation and are actually not good anymore because it is not aligned with their essence. Presenting a different picture, Covey talks about the image ethos as opposed to, he calls the essence ethos, the character ethos. So if one presents a different picture, an image to the world, then what one actually is living and doing means one is inauthentic. Of course, the marketplace and or the customers and stakeholders will find out sooner or later. Not practicing what one preaches is a similar way of expressing it. Negative ethos is another problem. Many organizations hold beliefs that we can't do this, we will never succeed in that, and they never surface and explore the assumptions around that, the theories that underlie those statements, so they will never try, and as a result, of course, they can't do this. And there would be downright criminal or illegal ethos, which characterizes some organizations. And in a global environment, this can be a very fine line, because different cultures have different attitudes, which manifests in different behavior, and it may well be that one behavior is illegal in one society but perfectly legal in another society. So it will be a huge challenge for an organization to explore the boundaries of what is and isn't allowed as they start operations in another culture. We are now coming to the section on key concepts of ethos. What is the definition of ethos? Ethos is an information field. In Module 1, we have learned about information fields, namely that the web of the biomatrix has a universal information field behind it, and that this information field determines how the different systems, activity and entity systems, of the biomatrix unfold. This universal information field contains subfields. In fact, every entity system has its own subfield. Every species of entity systems, humans versus maybe other animals, plants, have their own ethos field, but within a species, each individual type of dog, and then each dog, for example, has its own ethos field. Likewise with humans, we have one ethos field we share. Then we have subfields. Different religious groups, different cultural groups, economic groups, etc. have their own subfields of ethos. The orange dot in the center of the entity system illustrates this subfield. We refer to the subfields as ethos. So every entity system has its own ethos field. We have different names for those ethos fields. In the case of a person, we speak of the character of a person. It contains the values and guiding principles of that person. In an organization and in a society, we speak of culture. And when we refer to the ethos of systems in nature, we speak of the laws of nature. We have previously learned that the web of the biomatrix consists of three subwebs, that of the naturosphere, psychosociosphere, and technosphere. Each of those spheres has ethos, but there is a qualitative difference in the ethos between those three subwebs. The ethos in the naturosphere is observed in the regular behavior patterns of nature's systems. We normally refer to those behavior patterns as laws of nature. The ethos in the psychosociosphere is determined by the system itself and is referred to as culture. There's also, of course, an aspect of socialization, an automatic taking over of the ethos from one's cultural environment. But there's a great deal of free will involved in changing one's ethos as a social system if one wants to. And in fact, the essence of transforming a system is changing the ethos of the system. The ethos in the technosphere is reflected in the design of the technology. So it is fixed, but we are obviously free to design different technologies that have a different ethos. Ethos resides at the core of an entity system and determines the form and function of the system. A typical example is the DNA in the body. According to the DNA, our bodies develop and unfold. If you're looking at an organization and what the role of ethos is in an organization, for example, a good example is franchising. If we are taking a little restaurant that used to serve hamburgers and we transform it into a franchised hamburger joint, it is not about the particular hamburger, it is about the whole ethos that drives the restaurant that changes. So franchising is really an ethos business. Likewise, if we are looking at changes of ethos in society, or the role of ethos in society, if we are looking at colonialism, that is like franchising on a societal level, colonialism takes the ethos of one society and imposes it onto another society. A typical example is currently we are exporting the model of Western democracy to various other nations in the world. This is a transfer of ethos. We try to have those societies think in the same way with regard to their governance as our Western societies. The graphic representation of ethos is an orange dot. At the center of that dot is a focal point which represents the self of the ethos, or the self of the entity system. And the ethos fades at the edges, which indicates the field nature of the ethos. The darker orange around the focal point of the self means that the closer the values are to the self, the more the self identifies with a particular bit of ethos, the closer it is to its center. And then every entity holds values which come to the fore in different contexts and maybe only occasionally, and do not define to the same extent the self. So on the edges, the entity holds values that are not so important. So eventually the ethos field of any entity system becomes part of the larger universal information field. What are the components of culture in social systems? We speak about filters of perception. Different brain-mind functioning gives rise to different perceptive types. If we picture the artist versus the scientist, for example, they filter the information differently. They see different things in the world. They have a different worldview. Different worldviews mean different theories and beliefs of how the world works, of different values, in other words, what's important in life. There are also images and symbols that are part of an ethos. We have different pictures, different symbols that define us. For example, the brand of an organization can be a symbol and illustrates the core of what that organization is about. There is a collective unconscious and an unconscious in general. We know that as persons, a large amount of our ethos resides in the subconscious. One can almost illustrate that with an iceberg. There's only a small visible part of the iceberg above the water, and the larger part is under the water. Likewise, there's only a relatively small part of our ethos that we are conscious of, and we know from psychology that we have a lot of unconscious values and beliefs which determine our life for the better or for the worse, and we are not conscious of that. The same is true in an organization. We come into an organization and they may have some values that they are affirming consciously, but one can become aware as a management consultant, for example, that the actual ethos is a completely different one. It resides in the subconscious of the organization. If you're looking at the time perspective of ethos or culture, then we talk about traditions. As the organization or the system develops and grows, it will change its ethos over time. If the change is a fundamental one, then we talk about a transformation of the system. For example, a conversion of a person to a new religion or a new ideology, or an organization transformation like the transformation from an industrial age organization to an information age organization. Such transitions are associated with fundamental changes in ethos. If we are looking at systemic principles of ethos in human systems, ethos forms a hierarchy of information. What that means is that some information within the ethos is more important than other information. And we can illustrate that by the information cone. At the bottom of the cone is worldview. If I'm shifting my worldview, then I have different theories and beliefs. Likewise, the values depend on the worldview and theories of beliefs that I hold. Those applied in different contexts give rise to different attitudes, and attitudes determine our behavior. If we want to change ethos, we could change it at any level in the information cone. Behavioral psychologists work on the level of behavior. So if we're spending the amount of energy depicted by the gray shape on changing behavior, then all we change is that specific behavior. If instead we are changing attitude, which is a level lower, then we change larger range of behavior. So for example, if I want to make my family more punctual and I train their behavior, then all we achieve is punctuality in the context of the family. If we are changing attitudes about punctuality, then a greater range of behavior will be affected. If instead we are changing the perception of the value of time, for argument's sake, then we will change attitudes about punctuality, but we will change other attitudes and other ranges of behavior as well. For example, we will become more organized in general and save more time. Or if we change our beliefs about time, for example, if we believe we don't have enough time to write the book we want, and we get a new theory, the theory of the flow state, then we realize, but the way we are working with time can change, so our values will change, our attitudes and behavior will change. Or if we become aware that there's a different worldview associated with a change in time, for example, the power of now, then we realize that there are different kinds of theories, values, attitudes, behavior associated with time. We are changing the way we perceive time in general, and we will have a lot of theories, beliefs, values, attitudes changed, and not only in the area of time. We will also change it in terms of our relationship, in terms of what we do at work, etc. What we try to do in system thinking is we are trying to change the worldview. System thinking is a worldview, and we hope that by instilling the principles of system thinking, you will apply them to many areas of your life and review a lot of theories, beliefs, and values and attitudes that you may hold. The information cone is having an inverse cone determined by the inner environment, and that depends on the genetic predisposition, neural functioning, brain structures, and the interaction with the inner environment and the outer environment of the worldview theories, etc., gives rise to different perceptive types. Another important principle is that ethos creates meaning. The values in our life and the values according to which we live create the meaning in our life. They explain why we do what we are doing. If honesty is one of my important ethos points and I've done something wrong and I apologize or I confess, then it is a direct outflow of that value of honesty, and it gives meaning to my action of apologizing or confessing. And normally, if we do an action like that, and we often apologize and we don't really mean it, we have to look at how serious we are taking that value. In an organization, it is very important that we clarify the ethos, because it answers why employees are supposed to do what they are doing, why they have to be polite to customers if one of the values of the organization is to make the customer happy or to respect the customer or whatever. Another important point is that ethos transforms. If I'm assuming new values in my life, then my whole life transforms. We all know that from persons who have undergone, for example, a religious or an ideological transformation. That person literally becomes a new man or a new woman. Ethos is also synergistic. Depending on the combination of values I hold, I become a person that is more than the sum total of each of those values, because they mutually reinforce each other and they are creating a system that is richer than each of the values. So it is important in an organization that we select our values very carefully. If we are missing one dimension to be represented by a value, it is very likely that we are not developing in that dimension. We are not a complete whole. Another systemic principle in human systems is that ethos is paradoxical. It is diverse as well as integrative. We have learned in Module 1 already about paradox and the two divergent tendencies of integration and differentiation. The same is true for ethos. There is great diversity in ethos. In fact, no two entity systems are exactly alike. Even if we are taking one-egged twins, there is a difference in their ethos. Within a person, there is also a diversity of ethos. Ornstein, a famous brain researcher, consciousness researcher, made the statement, "I am many." What he meant by that is that he is different persons at different times. Different contexts bring out different parts of one's ethos. When I'm a worker, I have different values, behave differently than at home in the family environment or in the sports club or in the church congregation or when I walk in the streets. Likewise, within the human family, there are different groups of society that have very different ethos. As Huntington observed in his book, The Clash of Civilizations, there are different ethoses that can lead to clashes between societies. And indeed, we are seeing that is happening in many parts of the world at the moment. So what we need to emphasize is the integrative dimension, that an entity system is a coherent whole with its own self. If I talk as a person, I have a self that knows that now I am acting as a worker or as a family person or as a friend. So there is a transcendent quality of the self. The same is in an organization. An organization will have different functions, and there is a coherence that is experienced as us being part of the organization. Or if we are looking at a society, there is the unity out of diversity arising around, for example, nationhood. One of the most diverse nations is the United States, and on their silver dollar they have the slogan E pluribus unum, which means out of many one. This describes very nicely the balance between the unity and the diversity. We are many and we are one. How do we manage that diversity? If we emphasize differentiations, we emphasize decentralization and empowerment. We allow the members of the system to act according to their own ethos. At the same time, we also need to emphasize integration by centralizing, coordinating, and creating alignment. There are various ways of doing that. It can be through laws, through regulation, through constitutions, or symbolically through flags, through brands, logos, hymns, etc. Any system has to balance the integrative and the differentiating tendencies within its ethos. The greater the diversity of a system is, the greater is the potential for its development. The more innovative, the more synergistic it can be. At the same time, it needs more integration. If there's little diversity, there will be little integration needed. If there's more diversity, more integration. And if there's lots of diversity and differentiation, lots of centralization, coordination, and alignment will be required. The path of optimal development, as we have learned in the module number 1, is balancing between differentiation and integration. Another characteristic of ethos is that it is multidimensional. We have learned that systems are multidimensional. For example, the activity system of building a house contains different dimensions. There's a technological and ecological dimension, a cultural dimension, ecological dimension, etc. As a result, the ethos of that specific house building project must contain values of those dimensions also. And we have to think what kind of economic value underpins our ethos. Do we want to build a low-cost house or a luxury house? What is the technological values we want to have embedded in the house? Is it high-tech or is it simple? What are the cultural influences that of the society we live in, or do we want something completely modern or new? What is the psychological value? Do we want a cozy house or do we want an impressive house? What are some of the physiological, biological considerations? Must it promote the health of the inhabitants? What are the ecological values? For example, do we want to have an eco-friendly house? And so on. Another ethos principle in human systems is that ethos is associated with brain-mind functioning. There are different structures. The brain can be divided up in different ways. Most typologists work with the so-called cortical functions and distinguish 4 cortical functions. The left hemispheric ones. Left hemispheric functioning tends to be linear, sequential, logical, while the right hemispheric functioning is patterned and very often intuitive. Then they distinguish between the frontal parts of the cortex. They tend to process information in an abstract manner, more conceptual manner, while the posterior parts of the brain seem to be more concrete. There are different typologies. Most of them are based on the work by C.G. Jung, who distinguished 4 cortical functions: the thinking function, the sensing function, which takes in data from the environment, the feeling function, and the intuiting function. Other typologists which build on those are the Myers-Briggs typology, Nate Herman and Catherine Benzinger instruments. We have looked at the various typologies and also looked at more recent brain research and integrated the data and came up with the following 4 modes: the analytic mode or the analyst, the organizer, the harmonizer, and the intuitor. If we look in more detail what those different functions imply, the analyst is characterized by logical, analytical, factual thinking. They are questioning, they are critical, they have a quantitative orientation, and they are often perceived as being impersonal. The organizer is concrete, practical, reliable, organized, detail-orientated. They also love procedure, and they're security conscious. The harmonizer is concerned with harmony, balance, relationship especially between people, but also relationship between areas of knowledge or a system and its environment, for example. They are conciliating, empathetic, compassionate, tend to be mediating, and in general are appreciative. The intuitor is imaginative, conceptual, original in thinking. They are visionaries. They are also holistic thinkers. They see the larger picture, the larger pattern. They're innovative and very often visual. The typologies are based on preferred functioning. So the typologists tell us that not every person is equally good in each of the 4 modes of functioning. In fact, we apparently prefer, for whatever reason, one mode of functioning above the others. However, preference does not mean competence. Many of us are competent in the other non-preferred modes as well. If we have been well educated, then the analytic and organizing mode has been trained into us, even if we are right hemispheric thinkers, by preference. The brain structures communicate with each other through nerve bundles that connect the different structures. As we can see from the drawing, there are no nerve connections across the diagonal. That means that these parts in the brain do not directly communicate with each other, but they communicate via the other neighboring brain structures. And this can cause communication problems within a person, but also between persons who are diagonally or of the diagonal types. So, for example, the intuiting mode, which characterizes the artist, may have difficulties with the organizing mode. So the cliche is the artist who can't balance her checkbook. Or the intuitor, the entrepreneur who comes with the big plan for the organization, this broad vision, is perceived by the organizers within the organization as being airy-fairy, while the intuitor regards the organizer as being pedantic, maybe slow, and very detailed, and they get irritated by that. The classic problem across the analytic and harmonizing mode is very often experienced by facilitators in the public sector, where the analytic mode are represented by the technocrats who are concerned with solving the big problems of society, like the healthcare system for the country, are confronted by community members who tend to be represented by harmonizers, and the technocrats are perceived by those harmonizers as being cold, unfeeling, uncaring, and in turn the technocrat cannot understand why the community representatives cannot see that there is a larger issue at stake than only their immediate concern. Another principle of ethos in human systems concerns typologies, namely that there's a coherence of ethos typologies across systems levels, that we observe similar ethos at different levels in the hierarchy of social systems. There has, for example, been research done on leadership and on organizational culture, and the typologies that the researchers have developed match very closely the typologies at the level of the individual and at the brain function level that we have discussed before. For example, Bollmann and Diehl have done a typology on leadership, and they came up with the following types of leadership: structural leadership, political leadership, clan leadership, and symbolic leadership. And if you're looking at the characteristics of these different leaderships, structural leadership is leading by analysis and design. So it is very much the analytic mode of leading. Political leadership is concerned with putting options on the table, negotiating around it, advocating specific options. In other words, it's the detailed organizing way of leading. Clan leadership is characterized by being a catalyst. The leader is catalyst, the leader is supporter, the leader that empowers. It is a harmonizing function. While symbolic leadership is characterized by inspiring, reframing, providing visions, etc. If you're looking at the research on organizational culture by Cameron and Quinn, they have identified at the organizational level the market culture, the hierarchy culture, a clan culture, and an adhocracy culture. And the words they use to characterize each is market culture is concerned with the performance of staff, competition, service to customers, market niches, in general an analytic approach to going into the market. The hierarchy culture is concerned with internal stability, internal systems, and controlling internal systems. It's when an organization starts looking at its own way of organizing itself. The clan culture is characterized by team building, relationship building, and a developmental orientation. The adhocracy culture is innovative, future-oriented, and change-orientated. So in other words, we are seeing similar patterns from the brain to the mind functioning, to the functioning of individuals within a team, and the functioning at organizational levels. They all exhibit similar patterns. And it is logical that this is so because it is, after all, human beings who are creating social structures. And if we are thinking in a particular way, we have to create structures that are an outflow of that type of thinking. One can apply typologies also to industries, organizations, and even functions within an organization. And one can categorize them according to different ethos types. In our 4-quadrant model, the businesses belonging to the analyst category are typically project and unique application related production and service delivery businesses. Examples are technical, legal, financial, and research-related organizations, provided that they do unique and innovative development. The organizer business is typically concerned with standardized production and service delivery. It is technical, financial, legal, and government organizations that are concerned with routine delivery of products and services. Harmonizer businesses are involved in interpersonal relations. Typical examples are the caring industries associated with healthcare, or the teaching industries, and functions like coaching, for example. Businesses belonging to the intuitor mode are concerned with creativity, innovation, and are design orientated. Typical examples are advertising, promotion, architecture, and so on. Typically, the industry, its organizations, the products it produces, the market it aims for, are aligned and fall within one quadrant. However, there can be also differentiation between them. For example, the computer business typically falls within the analyst mode. It is very rapidly developing. It is technical, analytic based, and IBM is maybe a good example, good case study of representing this type of business in its PC development. However, although the computer industry as a whole tends to fall into that quadrant, different firms can derive their competitive advantage by using characteristics belonging to other quadrants. So, for example, Apple in its Mac development has gone into the intuitor mode and maybe to some extent the harmonizer mode to create its own competitive differentiation, while Dell has derived its competitive advantage from becoming organized through its online ordering, standardized modularization, etc. So an organization can look at the different modes to see if it can develop or create competitive advantage, even if it belongs to a different industry. In human systems, an important ethos principle is the whole brain concept. This was promoted by Ned Herman, and he talks about the whole brain thinker, namely that the person, even if they're dominant in one or two modes, should nevertheless develop the other modes as well. And he also promoted the concept of the whole brain organization, meaning that all four quadrants must be represented in an organization. So the four types of management functions that he identified was strategize, analyze, organize, personalize, or harmonize. The typical functions that strategizing mode involves is the vision, mission, ethos development, new business, new product, new organization development, the brainstorming of solutions, the creation of ideal designs, etc. The functions associated with the analyzing mode would be strategic planning, resource development and management, problem analysis and problem solving in the technical sense. The organizing mode is concerned with operational planning, with implementation, with standardized production, with detail and routine work, as well as monitoring and controlling. The personalizing, harmonizing mode implies managing interpersonal relations, functions concerned with conflict resolutions, coaching, teaching, career development, various human support functions, caring functions, etc. The various functions within an organization fall typically into one of those four quadrants. So the corporate finance function would be typically part of the analyzing mode, while administration and production operations tends to fall in the organizing mode. Some of the HR activities fall into personalizing mode, while strategic planning, new product development, advertising, and large parts of marketing would fall into the strategizing, intuiting mode. Although a particular function may fall predominantly into one of the four quadrants, it should nevertheless also reflect the other modes. So, for example, the corporate academy, which is reflecting the personalizing mode, needs to strategize, it needs to have analytic activities, and it needs to also organize itself. The same would go for the corporate finance function, which falls into the analyzing mode. They may need creativity as well as organizing and interpersonal relation aspects. The four-quadrant model distinguishes between four management, leadership, and communication styles. The whole brain concept of Herman talks about the need for using all four in different contexts. An organization should have competencies in all four, and top managers should have competencies in all four. The intuitor management style is holistic, risk-orientated, tends to be adventurous and entrepreneurial. It is also somehow ad hoc. The analyst mode is authoritative, directive, and very businesslike. The organizer loves a traditional, conservative, and risk-avoiding management style. It generally aims at maintaining the status quo. The harmonizing style is person-focused, interrelational, and interactive. The four different leadership styles could be sloganized with vision, strategy, operation, and support. To give a case study, the visionary thinks, show the people the mountain and they will find their own way. This is true for them only, not for the other three. The analyst mode looks at strategy. They are not so much concerned about the mountain, but should we build a road or should we build a rail? What is more functional, what is better from a resource perspective, etc. By this time, the organizer and harmonizer are still not enrolled. The organizer is concerned with operations. They want to know, should we build a rail or should we build a road? Once they get those instructions, they take leadership in making sure that the rail or the road is being built. The harmonizer is not involved in the mountain or the strategy or the operation. They are providing support wherever the road goes or whatever is being built. They provide the first aid, they are the cheerleaders, they are the supporters. They make sure that everyone is happy. In any kind of change intervention, it is important to have all four leadership styles represented at different times of the change intervention. If only one leadership style is used, then up to 3/4 of stakeholders will not be enrolled in it. The four modes of communication style are also quite different. The verbal style of the intuitor is brainstorming. It is shifting from idea to idea without necessarily focusing on anything specific. They are also very visual, they love metaphor, and they are holistic. So they go with broad outlines and overview. Typical example is the representation of a vision or an ideal design. The analyst mode loves discussion as a verbal style. That means shooting down a particular argument that is brought forward, trying to find faults with it, proposing counter-arguments. In the written mode, they are factual, technical, they love graphics. A typical example would be a scientific article or a report about a particular issue. The organizer uses the verbal communication mode in form of instructions. They also love factual communication, but in great details, in point form, step-by-step form, and they need specific case studies, not metaphors, not generic case studies, but very specific ones applying only to them. Guidelines, instruction, manuals are typical examples of written communication. The harmonizer uses dialogue as the verbal mode. They are very sensitive to non-verbal communication, and they make sure that values are lived and needs are expressed, and that hidden values and hidden needs are brought to the fore and communicated. Creativity and innovation is typically associated with the intuitor mode. It involves visualization, imagination, the development and application of new concepts. Although creativity is associated with that mode, the other three modes have very important contributions to make to the emergence of creativity and innovation in an organization. The analyst mode contributes logical analysis of facts, figures like statistics and resources, and exploration of structures that can be used for the visualizing and imagining. So there's an interaction between those two modes that can give rise to new ideas. The organizer contributes by organizing facts and also making more detailed searches into the status quo and detailed reviews of it that need to be taken into consideration when looking at new ideas. The contribution of the harmonizer is that they sense hidden issues. They intuit that something is still missing and they bring that to the fore. They also sense if there is harmony or disharmony, not only between people, but between different concepts, and they can voice that and thereby contributing to the review of that and the greater emergence that can come as a result of it. What are the tools for managing ethos? We can use the typologies like Myers-Briggs or Nate Herman or any other typology for a variety of ways of managing ethos. For example, it will help us to understand the self, be it the person or the self of the team or an organizational function or the organization as a whole or our stakeholder, and it will help us to understand the other, be they a person, team, function, organization or stakeholder. It is useful to identify what type, personality type or market type or leadership type does stakeholder X, Y or Z represent. And how does one deal with those personality types? What are the needs of those personality types? What do they value? It can help a lot in managing them. It's useful in teamwork to combine teams that are diverse and also to understand where each team member is coming from. It will help to align tasks to personality types. It can be useful in conflict resolution if we understand the personality type of the other system, to know what is the conflict behavior, what are the values, what are their interests, and how can we deal with them appropriately. And of course, exploring stakeholder needs and concerns from different personality types. We can also look at a specific value according to typology. Often organizations have a list of values that represents their ethos. It would be useful to take those values and look at them from the perspective of each quadrant and see what added meaning can be derived of that. For example, if we are looking at the concept of money, and we are looking at it in terms of the analyst mode, then we would talk about accounting, budgeting, cost control, strategies, and the like. Looking at it from the organizing quadrant, we are thinking about bookkeeping, saving, penny pinching. The harmonizer would look at fundraising, the charitable use of money, while the intuitor may come up with very creative investment strategies, as for example the derivative development that is contributing to our financial problems. Ethos clarification is another important tool, and many organizations are doing it. What it really means is we surface the assumptions, the values and beliefs inherent in our behavior and our performance. So we're asking what value is reflected in that particular behavior. Is it appropriate behavior in terms of the value? Is the value appropriate for that situation, etc.? So they normally have workshops around that. And the result is to deliberately choose a set of values that should guide one's personal or organizational life. And part of the ethos clarification would also be to determine what is the value hierarchy. In what hierarchical sequence do I hold my values, which can be very important. For example, is profit more important than reliability? If those are two values I would hold as an organization. Now, as a case study, I worked with a client who valued reliability of delivery of the projects they engaged in and completion of the projects above profit. They had the saying that we never walk away from a project. It was an organization that had a lot of projects going on all over the world at any particular time, and it is inevitable that some of them, for whatever reason, are less profitable or even cause a loss. It would have paid that organization to walk away and not complete the project and cut their losses in many instances. But they would never do that because the value of completing, of being reliable in their value hierarchy was featuring higher than that of profitability and return on investment. One important concept associated with ethos clarification is that each value is a field of meaning. Sometimes organizations have a value and then they agonize over which formulation of the value they should be using. It helps in that case to take a value and look at its related values, the field of meaning around it. For example, the value of creativity has other related issues and values associated with it, such as innovation, brainstorming, blue sky planning, entrepreneurship, strategic planning, imagination, intuition, vision, problem solving, product or process improvement. Those are all prescriptions of the related values, beliefs, activities around a particular value. We could even place them in different distance to the center value that we explore. If we were to put innovation, for example, in the center, then product process improvement would probably be closer to it than imagination and intuition. The benefit of this value exploration is that one sees that a value is not something static and that a value in different contexts suddenly gets different meaning. So as we are looking for value clarification in different functions at the organization, we may well emphasize a different aspect of that particular value, which is different to the aspect in another functional context. Considering the multidimensionality of ethos is a very useful tool. Any system or any issue we are looking at, or any decision we make, any design we make, any plan is multidimensional. It has an economic, cultural, ethical, aesthetic, knowledge-related, ecological, technological, etc. dimension, and needs to be or can be considered from the perspective of those ethoses. The more values are accommodated in the system or the issue, obviously the more developed is that system. Another important tool is self-referral or self-reflection. The system asks continuously, am I doing the right thing? Am I reflecting the right ethos? Am I living my values, so to speak, in everything I'm doing? That is expressed by the famous saying by Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. So this statement really is one of self-referral or self-reflection. Now, one may argue that life is worth living anyway, reflected or not, but certainly a life that is lived consciously and examined can be much richer than one that is led in an unconscious or less conscious manner. A saying by Ethos, plan or be planned for, also expresses a similar sentiment. If one doesn't deliberately choose one's ethos, one's values, and deliberately plans one's life, somebody else will for one. Then we are living the values and the ideas of somebody else. So self-referral and self-reflection is a very important aspect of managing ethos. In an organization that manifests as self-reflective planning, we ought to plan, doesn't matter if it is operational or strategic planning, in a self-reflective manner. The reflection in operational planning typically is concerned with best business practice. Are we doing the thing in the best way we can? Can we improve what we are doing in small ways, in small steps, in a day-to-day way? While the self-reflection in a strategic planning context is for the continuous development of the system. Are we going in the right direction? Will that allow our long-term survival, our long-term development? Is that strategic innovation? So self-reflection drives those questions. There will not be strategic innovation or conscious long-term desirable development unless the system has learned to plan in a self-reflective and self-referring manner. Let us look at the application of ethos in activity and entity systems. The ethos of an activity system is an emergence from the ethos of its different stakeholders, such as the ethos of the industry, including that of the industry regulation, the entity system of origin, in other words, the organization itself, the customers, suppliers, and maybe other stakeholders. For example, the finance function in an organization follows the universal ethos of the finance industry. But the organizational values also influence how the organization interprets them. And different clients could be treated differently according to their specific values. Likewise, the suppliers, such as different types of creditors, could have an influence on the ethos of the financial function of an organization. Exploring the ethos of stakeholders clarifies the ethos of the system. It could lead to changes in its ethos if some of the stakeholder ethoses change, for example. It could, however, also lead to the realization that the ethos of the system is incompatible with that of a stakeholder's ethos, such as a supplier or a customer, for example, and this could lead to the break in the relationship and the search for a new stakeholder. In designing and managing ethos in a supply or value chain, it is important to understand that there is an ethos of the containing activity system which influences the ethos of each sub-activity system. At the same time, each sub-activity system has its own function-specific ethos. And it is important to create coherence between the ethos of the sub-activity system and that of the containing activity system. For example, if my previously mentioned cake baking is a gourmet affair, the ethos of the ingredients, of mixing, baking, decorating, etc. must be of high quality. It may even involve making it by hand. Another baker, on the other hand, might go for economy or for speed through automation. Likewise, if the overarching ethos of an energy supply chain is sustainability and renewable energy, then this ethos needs to percolate through all links of the chain, and all links in the chain need to look at their business model in such a way that it can support the ideal ethos of the overarching supply chain. How do we manage ethos in an activity and sub-activity system? Well, first of all, we have to clarify the ethos in both the containing activity system, or the overarching value chain, and the ethos of each link in the chain, in other words, each sub-activity system. And the two ethoses are interrelated. The overarching ethos will affect the ethos in the sub-activity system and vice versa. So what is, if we are talking nutrition, for example, what is the overarching ethos of a nutrition supply chain? We would propose it should be health. So if I'm in the production of a specific food type and the overarching ethos is health, then I know I'm not allowed to put food additives in that are not health promoting or that are health damaging. So we need to understand what is our overarching aim. One of the problems we have in many industries is that we have a profit or finance domination. So this is the overarching ethos of many industries, which results in practices in sub-industries which are damaging to other values from other dimensions in the name of profit. So, for example, we could make shortcuts in food production that have outcomes that are not health promoting in order to ensure that we are having financial benefits. If you're looking at a supply chain, it is important that the activity system and its sub-activity system ethoses are coherent with each other. This doesn't mean that they have to have the same ethos, because some of the sub-activity systems are function specific and they have their own function specific ethos, but they need to have an overarching coherent ethos. So, for example, we cannot have in the nutrition chain health as the overarching ethos, and then a sub-activity system is violating that ethos value because it overemphasizes an economic or a technological or an efficiency or whatever other value above that of health. One of the reasons why we have so many problems in the public sector is that we do not have coherent overarching ethos in different industry supply chains. We do not declare, for example, health as the overarching in nutrition so that every producer of foodstuff is adhering to that. Or we do not normally enforce sustainability as the overarching value in the energy supply chain. So we allow very unsustainable energy producers like fracking and tar sands and operations like that to even grow at the expense of other more renewable energy sources. In designing and managing ethos in an entity system, we need to be aware of the paradox that on the one hand, the entity system as a whole has an ethos. We call it the organizational culture in an organizational context, and that this culture holds the whole entity system together. It represents its identity, its brand, its self. At the same time, each activity system has its own function-specific ethos. However, this function-specific ethos is influenced by the organizational ethos. At the same time, the function-specific ethos could influence also the ethos of the organization as a whole. So there's an interaction between the two types of ethoses, that of the whole and that of each of its parts. More specifically, as a value of the entity system ethos is applied within a specific activity system, its meaning might change according to what is appropriate in the functional context of that activity system. If the same value is applied in another activity system, then again it will acquire the meaning that is appropriate in the context of that system. A learning organization is ethos-driven. So we have to look at how do we manage ethos. The theory is that according to the ethos, an information will develop. The ethos informs, puts form into the physical reality of the system. It changes the form and functioning of activity systems and their interaction within an entity system. So it is very important what kind of ethos we choose, because as you think, so you will become, as the famous saying goes. The most important principle associated with ethos management is self-referral. In other words, the system refers to itself and asks itself, is this an ethos I want to have? Is this authentic to what I am? And in the case of behavior, the system asks, is this behavior that I want to set or have done in accordance with my ethos? So what are the procedures of ethos management in a learning organization? First of all, we need to be clear about our ethos. That may involve clarifying processes of ethos, and if we do not like the ethos we currently hold, we have to redesign our ethos. Then this desired ethos needs to be entrenched in the organization. So we need to transform existing structures and processes according to that ethos. We also need to design procedures in line with the desired ethos and have criteria, for example, performance criteria that are aligned with that desired ethos. Thirdly, we need to live the ethos. In other words, we need to entrench self-reflective planning and performance management through standardized templates, procedures, and also performance criteria that are aligned with the ethos. And we need to link knowledge management to ethos in the sense that knowledge associated with ethos, like best business case that really represented the ethos of the organization, ought to be recorded in standardized knowledge repositories. Or interpretation of ethos in a particular, for example, client interaction, which gives us learning, should be recorded.